Hello and welcome to Sin.bc, where right now it's 21:24. Pretty late actually. It's one of those few times that I've actually been home for a while and haven't really, recorded. Why? I wished I had a reason. Now, what I'm thinking about is that it was kind of stupid, right, of me to take on this idea of, I'm going to make daily uploading scheduled videos every single day until I reach 365 days, just because I wanted to give it a fair and honest try before I actually realized what that was really going to mean, right? Because some days you're down in the dumps, some days you're up in the sky of happiness, and sometimes you're just like I am today. You're a bit tired, yeah. And I'm thinking, if this is how I'm reacting now after being in school for a while, and let's be honest here, right? I think it's hard work being in school, producing papers, doing research, doing solid work. But is it the same as being physically exhausted after an honest day's work that I'm later on going to do in the summer? Arguably not. I'm going to be physically drained, right? So how am I going to record all of those videos then if I'm thinking that it's a bit iffy to do it now? Yeah, I know. All of these conundrums for the future. Something else actually kind of funny that happened today before we're going into the meat and potatoes of this video, yeah? Is that one of my friends was doing another kind of thing about, doing daily videos. Is that one of my friends today was playing one of my daily videos. Not a long amount of time, right? Just like a few seconds. Just about the intro and me saying hello, right? And all that good stuff. Now, I like hearing my own voice more than anyone else probably likes hearing their own voice, right? But that's not the same thing as having my friends listen to me when I'm in the room, which feels a bit awkward as it is, talking about my opinions as if I'm talking to a crowd full of people, right? There's a bit of a difference there of me listening to my own voice and seeing my own videos, they listening to my voice and seeing my videos on their own, and they seeing my videos in a group. And then there is the situation that happened today when they are all listening to it, right? Maybe not consciously, maybe not their focus, right? They were probably focused on other things. But I was just sitting there like, I'm in the room. This feels really awkward. Anyway. It matters less because that is ultimately not why you or I am here. Now is it? I'm here because, live here. I know dry humor never gets old. Am I right, people? Am I right? Anyway, but what you are here is probably due to the title of this video, or because you want your daily routine of just a bit of a talk, yeah? Improving my own vocal skills. And what we're going to talk about today is something that I've actually been covering before, but this is because, I'm covering the Munk debate about political correctness with Stephen Fry and Jordan B. Peterson on one side, saying that the individual should be in focus and political correctness is getting on the way of progress. And on the other hand, we have Michael Dyson and Michelle Goldberg, I would like to say, that are standing on the side of saying that political correctness is actually progress and it helps to elevate the individual rather than diminishing them. And the exact point what we're going to take up today is that the political correctness side of this argument, the guys who were pro, or the people who were pro, wanted a diversity that can be seen or directly categorized or articulated, such as sexuality or race. So they wanted that kind of diversity. They were talking a lot about I think it was called identified politics, individual. But they were talking about basically group politics, right? And I would rather argue that is a bad diversity, and I've been mentioning this before, as I said. And what we want is cultural and intellectual diversity. Sometimes they go hand in hand, but we should not quote people in because of this into different organizations, into different political structures, since it does as well not always go hand in hand. That was all of my notes for today. Let's get into it, right? And as I've been saying, I have before stated that I don't really particularly like diversity that much. I don't think it's that important, right? And when I say it's not that important, I'm not saying that diversity isn't important in the sense that intellectual diversity isn't important. However, that tends not to be what people are talking about when they are talking about diversity. which in my opinion is really unfortunate, and what I would argue actually came across during the interview, or rather during the debate. So as I said during my notes, the one side were saying that we want diversity, we want identification politics, we want all of that good stuff, alright? We want people to be able to see that there actually is a difference in leadership. We don't want all the people to look the same. That is what they kind of said diversity was. We want different genders, right? And I'm not just talking the one and the two, like the man and the woman, but everything in between as well. And I'm not against that, of course not, but they were kind of saying that we want diversity that can be seen, and it was kind of like the video that I did about your clothing and your fashion a while back, that people kind of want to tell with a fashion statement, which is also a reason for why they're buying new clothing and changing clothes more than that they're actually falling off and being deteriorized, right, and getting damaged, is because they want to physically show their own development throughout their life, right? I'm not the same person that I was 15 years ago, so that is why perhaps I bought a new jacket to kind of reflect that. This is kind of the same thing. We are not the same government that was 15 years ago. We have a different political structure. We look different, right? We have a different leadership position set up. We have a different idea what we're gonna how we're gonna deal with different problems. We want to physically show that we are more catered to the people, and for that case too, the people in the country should be felt represented by the people in power. That's kind of how democracy works, now doesn't it? You vote on people that you want to rule the country. Well, for that to be as effective as possible, it could be argued that then you want people to be able to vote on people that, well, they feel in connection with. Unfortunately, I'd say, or I would like to add to that, is that kind of tends to be people vote on people who look the same as them. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case. I'm not saying that I would vote in that kind of way, but unfortunately, it has been argued a lot in my social circle, at least, that could be the case, and I think that many people would argue or would be open to the possibility that unfortunately could be true. That people tend to vote on people who look like them rather than voting on people who actually feel the same way as them. Even though those are the people too, which I think is more, sane and relevant. On the other hand of this discussion, right, we had Peterson and Stephen Fry, which, well, you should go and watch the debate and get your own understanding of what these two sides were actually talking about, because as of right now, I'm trying to provide you with the context, but I could be biased in my presentation of it. So I highly recommend that you go and watch it as well, if you do have the time. It's about a 2-hour debate, and I think I found it highly enjoyable. So yeah, create your own perception, right? But on the other side, we have Stephen Fry and Jordan B. Peterson, who was more focusing on the idea that shouldn't we be focusing on the individual instead? Because it's really good that we want this kind of diversity, but we shouldn't just be quoting in people because they look different. And now I'm going to take over with my opinions, right? Even though they might have said it one of the sides, but this is from on now probably going to be mostly my idea of the entire subject. So what I think is that I totally agree with this individualistic approach. Now I understand that the collectivist approach needs to be taken at times, especially when we're talking about, well, democracy overall, because we're not just talking about the individual, we're talking about the collective as a whole, and we do that. So I don't mean that we should be focusing on one specific person. I'm just saying that if the collective is to choose people who should be in power, or whatever we're talking about, actually, I mean, if we should say that the collective as a company should be choosing who to hire, or the collective as a company should be choosing who to put in a management position, or if the collective as a group should be saying, well, we want you in our circle of friends. Shouldn't that be based on diversity that cannot be seen? Or specifically articulated as well, I might add. Because imagine how crazy it is, and I think this, and feel free to argue against me in the comment section below, because I would like to see a different opinion about this, because this is just my opinion. That isn't it more sane, and doesn't it feel better to evaluate if someone is good at a job, to evaluate if we should hire someone, to evaluate if you want to be friends with someone, or to evaluate if someone should be put in power, and evaluate if you should relate to someone's opinion based on, well, their opinions, and perhaps not their education, but the way they're going about arguing about specific topics, the way they are going about arguing about specific, what you would say, areas of interest, the way they're just, the way they're arguing, the way they're thinking, the way they are, their personality, right? Shouldn't that be the thing that makes them diverse? Isn't that kind of the diversity that we want to have when we talk about diversity? And if it isn't, shouldn't that be the diversity that we do want to have? And I think, right? And I think that that was kind of the case that they were discussing when it came to political correctness in the debate. That political correctness it's more about being right. It's more about putting the power to the people to say that, well, if you behave in this way, and if you say things in this particular way, you are right. So for instance, diversity. We want that, right? So diversity is right. And according to political correctness, in order to show and validate that you are right or not, we want diversity that can be seen. Which is why, for instance, a lot of areas that tends to be political correct, they tend to involve both men and women and everybody else in between that might feel that they want to be joined in this conversation. That was probably poorly phrased, but just men and women and all binary in between. Yeah, I don't know how to say this without offending people. And then you should have all manners of different races. Really, no matter what you're talking about, in order to say that I'm not disqualifying anyone and I'm not excluding anyone. And you want to have all of these things represented in the, in a potential leadership position. You want, arguably and optimally, to have all of these things represented. Because then you can, as a politically correct, or rather if you're discussing something that has a matter of political correctness to it, you can say that, well, look at this board. This board looks different, therefore we can say that diversity has been applied. I would argue this is kind of the easy way of going about the problem. The problem is that, well, we aren't diversified enough, and I think that everybody can see that. However, just by quoting in people to make us look diversified doesn't really make us diversified. And I'm going to take up the exact same example that I took last time. Last time I discussed this. And I think this will be a recurring point until the day I stop doing this, because I think this is a really important thing to talk about. Is that I would much rather have people from the exact same... I would rather have people who look exactly the same. I mean, you couldn't tell one from the other. For all that you know, they're identical twins, but there are hundreds of them. Right? They all look exactly precisely the same. Now, I'm not arguing that that isn't boring, right? I'm not saying that the entirety of the earth should look like that. I'm just saying that I would rather have people who look exactly the same gender, the same race, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to have it, who has been growing up in different parts of the world, who has very different perceptions. And I know this probably ain't gonna happen because, well, based on where you live, you're probably gonna look a certain way. Not just because of race and stuff, but because, well, you're gonna be sunburned more or less based on where you're from. For instance, someone from Iceland and someone from Egypt is probably gonna look a bit different. You're probably gonna see the difference between them, even if they were identical twins. That's all I'm gonna say, right? But for the argument's sake, I would rather have someone who looks exactly the same from different parts of the world, who have different perspectives on life and different perspectives on how they go about solving problems, with different educational backgrounds, who bring different perspectives to the table when it comes to, well, dealing with the problem. That's kind of the individualistic approach, right? You're evaluating the individual not based on how they look, but based on what they're actually bringing to the table, which I think sounds fresh, yeah? I think that sounds absolutely sane. I think it sounds amazing. It would look really weird when you say that we have diversity on this board and everybody looks the same, but that would be like the harder way of doing it, showing that you actually have diversity when you can't really show it physically. You need to show it in your actions and how you actually operate. I would rather have that any day of the week, yeah? Really, in comparison to have people who are all from the same neighborhood, who looks very different because it's a very culturally and nationally diverse area, But they all have grown up kind of the same. I mean, you can't really say that, but they've all grown up in the with the same kind of sort of circumstances. They're all friends. They're all from the same group of friends, and their kids are all playing together. Everybody is, experiencing the same kind of life from the same point of view. But they all look very different because, well, they're from different countries originally, or their parents are, and so on and so forth. I would rather much have all of the people who look the same being the part of my board or the leaders of my company than taking these people who are from the exact same neighborhood, who have the exact same perspective on life and the exact same perspective on a lot of different problems and perspectives on just how we should go about behaving in the world, but just happens to look very differently being in power. Because that's, in my opinion, as I think it's come across already, is the easy way of displaying diversification, whilst not necessarily actually having any diversification. But that's important as well, because we kind of want people to see and we want people to be able to connect to the board, right? And if you have someone who look like yourself, then it's probably, arguably, unfortunately, I would argue, going to be easier to do that. Is that something really bad? Is that a social convention? Is that just a construction of society? Yes, I would argue that it is. Is it something that we should fight against and be saying that, well, the individual should be more important than the group that we assume that they're a part of? Yes, we should. Do we do that? Probably not. Intentionally or intentionally or not intentionally, or unintentionally rather, that's what he's saying. As I've been saying before, the brain is probably just trying to make sense of the world, which tend to make you categorize people and, well, both as individuals and as people from different places in the world, just because you want to make sense of the chaotic environment around you. So your brain is doing the best job that it can, and it's doing an amazing job, just not good enough for society's standards. And I think that we should really try and push this idea of diversity based on knowledge and personality, instead of diversification based on something that you can specifically in a very shortly articulate. Like, for instance, and I'm saying that just because you can't just look at someone and say, oh, you're gay. But if they say, hi, I'm gay, that shouldn't necessarily be diversification in and within itself, because you can still have the exact same, or I'm saying you still can. I mean, you obviously can or have the exact same opinions and perspective on life as someone who's straight that happens to be beside you. Even though they might look very different from you, even though they might look exactly the same as you, they can behave exactly the same as you. And that's kind of the problem, right? That we're seeing today diversification as an observed behavior. We're looking at people who look different from others, and we say that's diversification. Whilst we should be looking at how people behave, what people say, and we should say that that is diversification. Because in my opinion, truly, that is diversification. I think that this message came across, and hopefully without making anyone cross at me. Pun definitely intended. Was it good or not? Well, that's a discussion for another time. That's a topic for another time. Anyway, mates, I think that I got that point across. So I'm going to end it right here. Have a nice one, mates. And tomorrow we're probably going to talk a bit about categorization, and is political correctness making more categorizations than it solves. If I haven't been talking about that already, I will making a double check about that. Anyway, mates, have a nice one. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.